Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, it is a return to the days of Dickens, sending some of the poorest people to jail for bills they simply can't afford. Or it is a valuable tool for councils to deal with people who don't pay their council tax. England is now the only country in the UK where you can be sent to jail for council tax debt. And since 2011, hundreds of people have been in prison for just that. Today, though, a report by the Social Market Foundation is calling on the government to change the law, citing it as inhumane and ineffective. In this exclusive report, we've been speaking to two women about becoming prisoners for failing to pay their council tax.
I cried most of the night. You just laid there in this little bed. You can't believe it. You know, ripped away from your family, your own home comforts, and it's scary.
A mother and a grandmother, now a former prisoner. Nicola Johnson spent 87 days in jail this year, in the same prison as multiple murderer Rosemary West. But her punishment was for failing to pay her council tax. She'd worked nights as a carer when one of the people she looked after went into hospital, and in an instant, her income went down by £650 a month.
I just couldn't possibly make ends meet. I had a good job. I'm, you know, putting back into the community, and my life's just gone belly up. It's not that I didn't want to pay it, I just couldn't possibly do it.
Her debts mounted, but only one carried the threat of jail, her council tax. Eventually she was summoned to court and sent to prison for nearly 3 months. What did you feel when they put the handcuffs on?
I was shocked. I felt humiliated, and then you kind of hoping that, oh, they won't really make me do 87 days, will they? You think I'll be out in a week, but no.
Non-payment of council tax is a very odd thing in that it's not a criminal offence, although they can send you to jail. But did you feel like a criminal?
No, no, not at all. So, you know, I didn't pay a bill. Hi!
Hi Nikki, how are you?
Yeah, not bad.
Nicola is now getting help and support from debt advisor Louise Foster. When Louise arrived for her first planned visit, Nicola wasn't there. She'd just been sent to prison. The majority of clients Louise sees have council tax debt, and she says the threat of prison is counterproductive.
You often go to a client's house and the curtains are closed, there's very little light inside. It almost feels like they're in a prison already because they're so anxious about people coming to the door demanding money off them. And it's not because they don't want to pay, it's because they really feel they can't pay. What do you feel about the idea that someone like Nikki, who says it wasn't that she didn't want to pay, it was that she literally couldn't afford to pay? What do you think about the fact that she has ended up in prison? That prison sentence actually pushed back her appointment by 3 months. We could have been well on the way to helping her by then. So it delayed things massively, which obviously has made her situation worse. So I think it's sad, and I don't really see how that solves the problem. The taxpayer is going to have to pay, obviously, for that prison stay.
Nicola says she owed more than £3,000. The average cost of keeping a prisoner in jail for 3 months is more than £6,000. 700 people across the country were sent to jail for non-payment of council tax between 2011 and 2017, and 7,000 were given suspended committal orders. That's according to today's report from the Social Market Foundation. They now want the English government to bring that to an end. England is now the only place in the UK where you can be sent to jail for not paying your council tax. Just last year, Wales ended prison sentences for council tax debt, arguing that they were outdated and disproportionate. Now the government here is under pressure to do the same thing. But with the total council tax debt across the country standing at £3 billion, the government says while prison should always be a last resort, it remains a sanction. Geraldine Hillier had to rebuild her life from scratch after she was jailed for a council tax debt of more than £3,000.
All I had when I come out was the clothes I stood in. I lost my house, everything that was in it. I had nothing.
She'd suffered a series of bereavements and a period in hospital when she says she really began to struggle financially. Although she accepts she was warned prison was an option, when she was summoned to court, she never thought it would happen.
The worst bit was seeing my son's face. I'll never forget that.
How did he look?
Mortified, terrified. I don't think he knew what to do.
Did you feel embarrassed?
Oh, it's horrible, especially when you've never even been in a police station.
She was driven to the prison, but so shaken, she was admitted straight to the prison hospital. And what was going through your mind then?
Everything. Everything. I thought about committing suicide. I thought everything. Anything to get out of there.
Geraldine's daughter found a solicitor to look into the case. Within 2 weeks, she was freed. She should never have been jailed in the first place. No assessment had been made in court of whether she could actually afford to pay the tax, a legal requirement before magistrates are able to send anyone to jail.
What about people saying, well, look, if they don't pay council tax, they should go to prison? What would you say to those people?
No, definitely not. There's a difference in can pay it and picking between paying that and buying food.
Which is where you were.
Yeah.
There are wide variations in how council tax debt is dealt with. Some authorities never send anyone to prison. The government insists, though it should be a last resort, it must be left as a tool in the battle against people not paying. Both women have told us, despite already having been in prison, they're still being pursued, and the threat of prison hangs over them once again.
Well, with me now, the report's author, Barrister Chris Daw, QC, and Kevin Hollinrake, Conservative MP and a member of the Commons Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee. Thanks very much to both of you. I want to start with you, Chris Daw. Why shouldn't people who don't pay their council tax, which everyone has to pay, why shouldn't they go to prison?
Because you can't get sent to prison for anything else. It's a remnant of the Victorian era of debtors' jails, as far as I'm concerned. The idea that people like those you've spoken to in your report, many of them vulnerable, a significant number of them women with either health problems or other problems in their lives, are being brutalised by the state. And it's immoral, in my view.
This is money, council tax is money, which is needed for social care, children's services, all services which are straining at the bit. There has to be a sanction of some sort.
Why? There doesn't have to be a sanction. There has to be a sensible, rational approach to collecting the money. The National Audit Office has made clear that when you use imprisonment and when you use the threat of imprisonment, it makes it harder to collect the debts.
Kevin Hollinrake, this is Dickensian sending some of the most vulnerable in society to prison for paying bills they can't afford. Do you feel embarrassed by this at all?
Well, I think it's definitely a better way to do it. I think most people, when they get in the situation, are utility providers, for example, who provide electricity and water. If they get customers get into trouble, they work on a much more collaborative basis with their customers, which achieve just the same results, in fact, better results, without getting into these kind of distressing situations. You heard there from Mrs. Hillier, I think, who'd suffered bereavements. She was clearly very vulnerable at the time, so there's got to be a better way rather than simply resorting to putting people in prison. Of course, there have to be sanctions.
Why are government continuing to do it then? Do you think they should stop continuing to do it?
The government's agreed to undertake a review on this. We addressed this point to the government. I'm co-chair of the All-Party Group for Poverty. We identified this area. Rishi Sunak, who was the government minister at the time, agreed to do a review. Brexit's a little bit in the way of that, but certainly these practices need to be reviewed.
But just to clarify, you're on the committee. Would your view be that they should withdraw the threat of imprisonment?
I think we should certainly look at that. We haven't looked at all the evidence. There have to be some sanctions. Why should people who do pay their bills subsidise people who don't? But it's not people who don't want to pay, it's people who can't pay, and there's a big difference there.
Chris Daw, you acknowledge in your own report the great majority do pay under this form of extreme threat, as you put it.
Yes.
That's the argument for keeping that threat right there, isn't it?
So many of them do, but that's because they go without food or they can't pay another bill. It's not because suddenly money falls out of the sky. The reason people get into this situation is because the cost of housing, the cost of energy, the cost of food has gone up and up and up, and incomes have fallen. People on benefits have seen themselves drawn into council tax for the first time. These people are the most vulnerable and the poorest in society.
But Kevin Hollinrake says there has to be a sanction.
There has to be a rational way to collect the money, and that is not using prison, because it costs hundreds of millions to do so. 300 million just on the bailiffs' fees in 1 year. So bailiffs are making a huge profit out of councils using this power, and it's disgusting.
I mean, that is a good point, isn't it? You know, you mentioned Rishi Sunak, who was the local government minister in April 2019. He announced changes to how councils collect council debt, cautioning against the unfair treatment of vulnerable people. You recognise the vulnerability of the women in that report.
Absolutely.
And yet the threat itself is surely unfair pressure on these people. They go to court, they're not even entitled to legal aid. How can
Imagine
this be
getting
right?
a letter saying you could go to prison if you don't pay this bill.
If it's somebody who's vulnerable, there's a difference between people who refuse to pay. Why should people who do pay their bills pay for those people, or subsidise those people? For people who are vulnerable in difficult circumstances, there is a much better way. That's why the government's committed to review. We've done this for years, for decades. It's not a party political issue, but it is right to look at this again now and make the changes that are necessary.
But instinctively, your own view would be that a review at the moment is enough. You don't want to fall down in terms of saying, yes, I'd like to see this.
It seems, I think Chris makes a very good point, as does the report. It seems unnecessary that you have to use a sanction of imprisonment in this situation. But you need to have some proper look at the evidence and build policies on the back of it rather than the other way around.
So you're not clear that the evidence is there yet in terms of...
You'd need a sanction. I think most people would agree that people should pay their bills, and people who do pay their bills shouldn't subsidise people who don't, but people who can't is a different thing.
But just to clarify, you are, for those people who refuse, you still think prison is the
I think
sanction?
we need to look at the evidence. Is there a better way for those people too? I'd prefer not to have that sanction, but if it's necessary, we should keep it.
Crystal, your report suggests 1 in 5 of the commitment orders, as they're
Yes.
called, sending people to prison, were unlawful because
Up to that
magistrates
number, absolutely.
weren't applying the law properly.
No, time and again, as in your report, because these cases come before the magistrates' court, hundreds and hundreds at a time. People who are in this position are not entitled to legal aid to fight their case from the beginning, and that's a whole story in itself. And the problem is that there is no proper scrutiny, there is no taking account of the situation these people are in, and some of them, sadly, can you just imagine going to prison like those ladies did in that situation?
So would you be satisfied with some movement on training magistrates better to deal with this law?
Absolutely not. It's an immoral law. It's a Victorian law. That's the reason enough to scrap it.
The most important thing is we train our councils better. Our councils need to learn from best practice how to deal with this. It's too easy to call in the bailiffs at a point in time where people haven't paid their council tax bills. Other people, other providers have found a better way to do this. So that's the most important part of
The very
of this
fact
whole
that
report.
some councils never send anyone to prison, though.
Most.
And some continue to do it. It's
Yeah.
just not fair. Though,
Well,
is it?
I agree. I mean, that's up to local councils to do what they think is right. But best practice means work with the individuals, work with people who are struggling to pay, get them back on track, and don't let these situations happen in the first place. The way we do it now is simply, it's haphazard, it's unfair on some, we need to review it and change it.
We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Chris Dorr, Kevin Hollinrake, thank you, both of you, for joining us.